Welcome to hashtag PMIRL Live. We are dual branding this one, so I'm actually going to also introduce our Between Two Birds crowd. So today's discussion with David Leslie. Say hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Today we're going to be talking about leadership. We're going to be talking about the Mike Babcock situation in Columbus. I say that as if it's present tense. It's already started and stopped before the season even begins. Mm-hmm. We're recording on today, October 5th, 2023. The season begins Tuesday. So, but yeah, this is a conversation about leadership, organization leadership, and how you permeate, I don't want to say good vibes, but the ability for people to feel safe, that execute work, that are the on-ice product in the NHL case, or in work environments, the folks that do the execution, all the way from the leadership level down to the execution team and everything in between, how you facilitate those environments. So welcome to the show today. David, how about you start by introducing yourself and what you do, who you are, why you have a point of view on this. Let's start.
Absolutely. So, hey, my name is David Leslie. I'm a QA manager and practice lead at Aries Solutions. So I've been in and out of QA for the better part of 20 years on different parts of teams. And where my interest comes in is a couple of different ways. Number one, I'm a huge sports fan. But also, too, I'm also really interested in how people go through the process of delivering things such as movies, shows, sports teams, projects. And there's a lot of commonality and there's a lot of common ground in there. And what really had me interested in the whole Mike Babcock situation was just the different elements that it touches when you start looking at how do you build a team to go after a project? How do you motivate that team using internal and external factors? And so there's just so much depth there. It's just like I reached out to Chuck and like, hey, this guy goes beyond hockey and beyond this particular case. But before we get going, it's like we've known each other a while. We worked on several projects together.
Correct.
I've never seen your phone.
You've never seen my phone? Oh, I see. I didn't think about that for a second. The reason I laugh is because my phone is recording this right now. I was like, never seen my phone.
First time I've seen your phone.
No, you're right. We've never once have I been like, hey, dude, you see that phone, right? Let's see what your activity was or is. That has never happened. You are correct.
Exactly. And I think where it gets really interesting is, so I have a 20-year-old son. I'm very comfortable and familiar with technology. And so I asked him last night, I gave him the scenario. And he works at a very male-centric workplace. I think there's like 2 women in his whole company.
Okay.
And part of that is because they're doing electrical wiring and engineering. And so I asked him last night, I said, hey, imagine this scenario. You have a new boss, and when you show up to work, the first thing it says, hey, Johnny, great to meet you. I'm so excited to be working for you. Can you show me some photos on your phone so I can get to know you better? Mm-hmm. And it's like, what would you say to that? And he was immediately like, no, absolutely.
So I think it's interesting because I surveyed my network too when it first happened. And what I found was that people over the age of 35 were just like, whatever. Like, it's a weird, sure. But would I have a problem with it? Also, no, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it speaks a little bit to maturity and how we're a generation of people that didn't grow up with cell phones as part of our everyday life for the bulk of our life. Mm-hmm. I got my first cell phone, I think, my junior year of college. Mm-hmm. When did you get your first cell phone?
Actually, it was later than that. Okay, it was like part of the reason I had my first cell phone was I was stuck in traffic on 270 like 4 hours. And my wife couldn't reach me because there was a massive traffic accident. And she was like, that day, she was like, we're getting a cell phone.
Okay.
And so it's that the interesting thing because like the thing I think we sometimes forget, and that the kids today are the most photographed people ever. They have literally they have grown up in a world where there is a camera literally in every pocket. They are the most photographed generation. Their kids will replace them in the most photographed generation. And so it's a very interesting thing of like, and how people take photos and what they take photos of is also like super interesting, because I've seen, like, for example, there's someone in my family who has a vision impairment.
Okay.
They take photos as a way to be able to read things.
Okay.
So they'll take a photo and then they'll pinch and zoom so that they can, so with some of the accessibility features.
Gotcha. So I want to take a quick step back because, again, this is a special podcast where we have a dual branded, dual audience. So for my Between Two Birds audience, they know exactly what we're talking about with the Mike Babcock situation. For my PM in Real Life audience, let me give some context here. So Mike Babcock, who is a well-regarded, or was a well-regarded NHL head coach, has won Stanley Cups, very decorated resume, was hired after about a 3-year hiatus, being away from the game, by the Columbus Blue Jackets to be their head coach for the upcoming season. During the offseason, as a get-to-know-you exercise with his players, he was meeting with players on-site, off-site from the arena, and was sharing photos from phones on a digital display, like a larger screen, through Aircast. And the way, after an NHLPA Players Association investigation and the Blue Jackets investigating, it was determined that with some of the older players, it was exactly as described. Get to know you. Hey, how about you show me some pictures of your family? Like, I'll share some of mine. With the younger players, it was almost like an interrogation of, let me see if you're doing lewd pictures, pictures of females, almost like a, what kind of lifestyle are you about? And a intimidation, invasion of privacy, intimidation element of a, hey, I'm your new head coach. I control your future. I want to know your psychology.
Right.
So that's the context of this. And you may say, hey, this is a sports organization, but the reality is it's a corporation just like any other corporation that we work for. So some of the, I'll call them HR rules, still apply here. And the power dynamics apply, but the leadership, the team building dynamics certainly apply here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, the other thing to call out specifically about the Babcock situation is part of the reason why he was available as a head coach was there was some questionable practices around power dynamics and motivation from his previous team, which was the Toronto Maple Leafs. And there is that point of, like, I think there is such a thing as coercive leadership and corrosive leadership, where you are trying to basically intimidate, and using a bully someone into performance, which was kind of seen as like that old school coaching mentality.
Yep.
And what was kind of fascinating from the Mike Babcock situation was it really goes back to how do you build a team? And this was something that we've talked about before on the side, which is, very famously, Netflix, when they published the Culture Deck, they kind of basically threw down the gauntlet and said, like, we are not a family. We are a high-performing sports team. But what's interesting, though, is like when you read and listen to high-performing sports teams, they're like, no, we try to function like a family. We understand that there's going to be changes. We understand that, there's going to be a business side with it. But how many times have you heard athletes or professional sports teams or even college sports teams saying, we're like brothers and sisters, or we're one heartbeat? And it's that kind of interesting, like, kind of mixing of the messages there that really kind of had me, kind of fascinated by, like, why was Babcock doing?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think it speaks to him just being a dinosaur, right? Like, Babcock's in his 60s. The old school bully methodologies of coaching, especially in the realm of NHL coaching and hockey, those were widely accepted for the better part of a solid 20-30-year window that Mike Babcock did coach within that era, right? Babcock said all the right things in media scrums and, I've changed, I've learned from my mistakes, blah, 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 blah. But clearly, it was right on display right away that all that was just airplay, right?
Well, they were actually planning. They ended up pulling it, but they were actually planning on doing a behind-the-scenes series about how Babcock was coming to age in the modern, like how he had changed. And it was interesting because, like again, coming out of my original plan, coming out of college and school was, coach baseball and teach history. And I had a really fascinating experience where I got to be a bat boy for 2.5 years for the Columbus Clippers, but I worked on the road side. So I got to see different managerial techniques and different organizational techniques from the different teams who came through. And this was back in the era where, you would hear organizations talk about how this is a way we want to prepare our players to get ready for the major leagues. So you would hear things about the Dodger way or the Yankee way or where the Cardinals organizations, and this is how we carry our business. I mean, so much so to the fact that for the longest time in the Yankee organization, if you were a minor league player, you weren't allowed to wear facial hair. Okay. And so, one of my favorite stories was Ron Guidry, who was, Hall of Fame pitcher in the Yankee organization, came down, and his teammate at the former teammate was Bucky Dent. And so one of the first questions he asked Bucky wasn't where's my locker, or what time do I have to be ready for the game? It was, hey, Buck, do I have to shave my mustache? And that's how strong the culture part. Sure, right. And so the question becomes is like, when you bring in someone like a Mike Babcock, what is the organizational culture you're trying to build in your organization?
So let's use the Blue Jackets as an example. Almost dead last in the league last year. Probably should have been. They somehow masterfully started winning games at the tail end of the season to knock themselves out of a first overall pick contention. But for all intents and purposes, a bottom feeding team.
Right.
And, lots of injuries last year. Seems like a club with zero direction. And they've been in existence for over 20 years at this point. Only a handful of playoff appearances. Have only won twice.
One series.
The Tampa series?
Yeah.
I thought they beat Toronto 1 year.
I don't think so. I think it's only one.
All right, I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought that you might be right. It might be one. Okay. Yeah, because they lost to Pittsburgh. They lost to Washington.
Yeah.
1 year. Maybe they never played Toronto.
The fact that we can just rattle this off
is that right? Okay, so they never played Toronto. I made that up. But anyway, they've had zero success to date. And so, the general manager, Jarmo Kekalainen, has been in his seat, I think, for a decade now.
Yeah.
Although he's made some, in my opinion, some savvy moves, not the best drafter, but some savvy moves from a trade standpoint. He doesn't have success to show for his tenure here. 10 years is a long time in professional sports to be sitting in the GMC. You're on your third iteration of coaches here.
Right.
This is Jarmo's last hire as a coach. I mean, quite frankly. And, so he goes with what I perceive to be the safe bet in a decorated NHL veteran coach with a somewhat checkered past, right? Okay, so the Jackets as an organization, they're pretty much a lunch pail group. Meaning, like, they come to work every day. They're one of the younger rosters in the league. They have speed. They have pieces. They don't have a whole team, per se.
Right.
So I think the mantra or the thought process at the time is Babcock is going to add some structure to this young group of, players, and hopefully that structure yields to some wins.
Right.
But I don't know that culture was considered, right? Like, it was a head scratcher for me when they first hired Babcock because, again, it's a young roster, and Babcock is known to have this old school, more rigid approach to the game.
Yeah, it's a culture of fear. And I remember when I was being mentored in coaching, that was one of the things. It kind of comes back to results-based management versus relational-based management. And so the idea behind that old yelly, screamy, Bobby Knight, if you're a college basketball fan, the hard school, hard-nosed football coach types was you were to make practice so difficult for your players that when they got to the game was easy.
Right.
Because it was so difficult. The problem, though, is that in the process of making practice so difficult, you can really take the love and joy out of the game. Like, you can just make it a drudgery. And if you're not careful, that can happen. Now, if you're going to see I'm wearing Alabama shirts, I'm a huge Nick Saban fan, but also a huge, Bear Bryant fan. The one thing that is really interesting, like if you look at Bear Bryant versus Nick Saban, one of the big differences was Bryant was, very famously when he was the coach at Texas A&M and the Junction Boys like that was near torture. Like they were denying water and they were working guys out 2 times a day, multiple hours a day in the Texas heat. And basically, very famously, like half the team ends up quitting because they just can't take it. The difference between then and now, other than like advancements in sports med, like we would never do anything like that now, so use them. But what was really interesting is, and this came up this week during Alabama's media availability, was they asked one of the players, like, what's it like to get yelled at by cinema? And he said that, I'm one of the guys who can take hard coaching, and when you come to Alabama, you're going to get coached hard. He said, but at the same time, there's a relationship there. Like he's doing that because, and oddly enough, a lot of people don't know this, but Alabama actually employs 2 or 3 different sports consultants, psychologist consultants. And one of the things they get seen a background on is for each player is what are their motivations and what is their motivation style. Because there are some guys on the team, and he even referred to it this year, the old Sparky Anderson quote of, there are some guys that you need to pat them on the back. There are some guys that you need to kick them in the butt. And then there's some guys you yell at. And he goes, and you just got to figure out where the guy fits on that, on the continuum. And so I think the challenge that Yarbo was in when he was bringing this way back is to your point. I think he was trying to, I need a guy with structure, winning pedigree to teach these guys how to win. But I think the danger when you bring in someone who doesn't have that relational piece or who's been fired because they've abused the relational piece in the past. And for those of you on the PM side, part of the reason he was fired as the coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs was that Maple Leafs had a 20-year-old, actually I take that back, 19-year-old star in Mitch Marner. And Babcock very famously asked Marner during a one-on-one to rate the entire team from 1 to 30 as to who worked the hardest versus who worked the least hardest. Marner rated himself last and then rated the team, thinking that, hey, this was just a one-on-one conversation between me and my coach. And then Babcock published the list.
Yeah, and Babcock alleges that he didn't publish the list per se. He alleges that the list was left on his desk. Other personnel, players saw the list because it was just left open on his desk. TBD, nobody knows what the truth is.
Right.
Those are the 2 stories being shared. So let's bring it to, corporations and organizations and how does this play into effect? So, I feel like in today's culture, HR teams have really cracked down on the toxic leaders of the world.
Yes and no.
Okay, let's discuss.
I will say that a lot of it depends on what your culture values. Okay, I've seen some organizations where the toxic leader is still tolerated as long as they're getting results. And it's happening. The moment that they stop getting results is when it becomes an issue, right? But it's not blatant. It is not like the old school, like you're walking on pins and needles. But I think there is some organizations where as long as you get the results, that's what matters. And I think you have to be very, very careful around those types of organizations. You almost kind of have to have a smell test when you're going through your interviewing, even your onboarding process. Because unfortunately, I have seen situations that have happened where it's just like, oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would agree with you. Most organizations value results over whether or not that individual is being toxic or not, right?
Right.
I hate to say it, but corporations, publicly traded, they're driven by stockholders and trying to make sure that their stockholders are profitable. They're driven by profits. The folks at the top are driven by performance bonuses, and everything else becomes a distant second to results and sales.
Yeah, and I think too, I think that's one of the things of the pandemic, and when you kind of look at how people saw what happened in the early days, especially the pandemic, particularly with some of the furloughing, where it was kind of like, oh, wait a second, I can be replaced that quickly. And you had, not in all organizations, but you did have some organizations where, there was like, the break glass plan, the first thing they went to was letting people go, as opposed to like trying to figure out ways of like, hey, how can we keep everyone together and get through this?
Yep.
I had some colleagues who went to, who were just like stunned by like how rapidly things went. And, at the end of the day, it's just like, well, it's just as we got to keep the shareholders happy. But that doesn't leave a great feeling when you're then like trying to come back and you're trying to build teams and organizations to get things done. It's kind of a short-sighted way of going. But I think too, when you start looking at building teams and trying to build connectedness, there is some times in which the outside comes into the workplace. And you've heard people talking about, you want to bring your whole self to work. And I think it's like just trying to figure out that balance, because at the end of the day, businesses are there to make money, but it's also there to support and maintain their teams as well. So there's that balance.
Yeah. And when I think about corporations, and particularly team building, right? Like culture is really everything. So, as a professional, my job is I'm a contracted project manager and program manager. Sometimes I come in at the beginning of projects or programs. Sometimes I come in midstream. And that's the first thing that I try to attack is the team structure. Do we have the right people in the right roles, the right positions, doing the right things so that it's one, efficient, but two, are we driving camaraderie? Right. Especially when you look at projects and programs that involve vendor partners, right? So third parties that play some role in the bigger picture. Do they feel like someone who sits across the table from you and you hold them accountable? Or do they feel like an integrated partner in all this? We're like, we collectively have a shared invested interest in getting the right results here, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's a big piece to it. And so, I think by nature of Babcock's approach here, of even just establishing a different approach with the veterans versus the kids, I think that set up a line, right? Like a line in the sand of like, hey, I can pull the strings of these veterans to influence the youth if I need to, right? Because the veterans are going to sit in the place like, hey, this is a good guy. I have no issues with him. Versus behind the scenes, I'm doing all types of things that, the kids clearly don't feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like it goes back to that mentorship thing as well. That's always then, not just in a sports situation, but also a work situation as well. Like that's one of the things I really enjoy about, the position that I have, is the ability to kind of help coach and mentor people into, kind of going from that manual tester to coaching them into like, okay, here's how you be a lead, or here's how you be a QA manager, and starting to kind of coach them through those cycles. But you also have to do that from a kind of a place of like understanding where their work-life balance is. And that's where things got a little fuzzy with what Babcock was doing with the photographs. There's someone that I worked with who knew that person had, it was their first child, and they were going through all the balancing of like, okay, we've got a little one who, they're not old enough for daycare yet, but I'm happy to kind of switch back and forth with my partner, and trying to figure out how we're going to balance out work, life, and the kid. And you have to kind of know, like, hey, these are the types of stressors, so you're not putting too much on that person's plate, right? And so I think you have to kind of bring that in a little bit, but don't let that be the clouding influence, right? Like you never want to sit there and say like, well, I'm never going to give this person this opportunity because they got a kid, right? I mean, that's not appropriate. But you do also want to be sure that you're having those good back and forth conversations to be like, hey, if at 4 o'clock you got to go because daycare pickup stops at X, then don't schedule them for a meeting at 4:30.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think now we're getting into negotiations, right? Like employee negotiations. Unfortunately, at pro sports, I don't know there's a whole lot of negotiations that happen from that standpoint, right? It's kind of the coach's way or the highway.
It depends. Like I think we're now starting to see like how many times in the past did you see the story about like the guy missing the game because there's the birth of a child.
I mean, there's that, yeah.
Yeah, and in the past, that never happened. It's like, it's like, hey, hope the kid comes during the off season.
Right. No, that's true.
The WNBA has been fascinating. Like, they've been dealing with maternity issues. There was a serious incident that happened over the off season where a player was like, I got traded because I had, my child was born during the season, and then my coach and general manager got upset, so they traded me. You know, when I was upfront with them. So
Yeah. And you know, that's such a hot topic, right? Like maternity leave, the rights of a woman to do us all a service as human beings and carrying on the species.
yeah, absolutely.
Right? And the way that we treat our female workforce is terrible. Like we just don't honor it as Americans like we should. This is, you know, I'm going a little bit off topic here.
yeah.
But this is this is the area where our worldwide counterparts in other countries seem to have gotten it way quicker than we get it. We act like 3 months is a gift, and other countries are like 7 months of maternity and paternity leave. And there's, you know, you shut down your email and you walk out the door, like you literally ghost for 6 to 7 months, and then come back after the dust has settled a little bit. Life is somewhat back together, right? Like,
but I think those negotiations are important, though. And I think, you know, and I think that's where the fuzziness of the Babcock situation was, and a little bit there too, because there's also that power dynamic. But like, how many times have you seen, you know, the show, you know, bring in a photo of when you were a kid,
right?
And the photo, or
I thought about that too. I did. But again, it's always bring me a photo, send me a photo. I'm not grabbing your device, right? Like, I'm not scrolling through apps and photo reels, and no, it's more like, you know, take some time, go figure out a picture that you feel comfortable sharing.
Well, so that was actually one of the. I was listening to a couple of different podcasts of people talking about the Babcock situation, and one of the scenarios that got tossed out, and it was actually tossed out by a middle-aged player, former player, and he was like, "Well, what if the guy was not out yet?" And it's photos of him and a call too about him and his boyfriend. Yeah, he goes, if he's not, you know, that, you know, and you know, there was the, you know, there's the infamous scene in Moneyball where, you know, the Oakland A's scouting department at one time used to have a checkbox as like, you know, does the player have an attractive girlfriend? You know, because that was seen as a sign of confidence. And it was interesting. It was kind of tossed out there anecdotally as is like, this is how dumb some of the scouting could be, but this is also some of the, you know, some of the intimidation stuff that could also be brought into play.
That's interesting. Okay, so let's tie it all back together, right? Like,
Yeah.
So, you know, there's the power dynamics, the culture shift. In hindsight, you're Yarmo Kekalai. What are you doing different?
I think the thing I'm doing different if I'm Yarmo is I need to have a serious conversation with Don Davidson, who's the president of the hockey operations hub. And my serious conversation is, what do we want the identity of the Columbus Blue Jackets to be, and which coach is going to best get us there? I think part of the reason they hired someone like Mike Babcock was the most successful coach that they've had from a success standpoint was a guy like John Torrell, old school, kind of hard-nosed guy, but also a guy who could be kind of grading. And as players start to age, you know, there's a thing about, you know, if you're the person who's like constantly on someone, there's a breaking point where you just stop, you tune it out, right? Versus say like a guy like, and every coach knows you have a window, but like take someone like, you know, we both respect someone like a John Cooper down in Tampa. Cooper is someone who, he is a very even keel coach. And for me, he's someone who is like, I think he would be like an amazing project manager because he never lets the highs get too high, never lets the lows get too lows. And he kind of keeps everyone cooling in the same direction, even though the pieces keep moving from year to year. He has a core group of people who he's kind of built the team around and who kind of bring them into, okay, here's how we do things in Tampa Bay. And it's a very cohesive organization from the top down.
So I think you touched on something great there. A core group that permeates the culture, right? Like, so it starts from the core group and whoever's at the head of that group saying, this is our culture. And so it doesn't matter who you bring in. If these are your top performers, and these are people who are advocates and preaching that methodology, and they truly are welcoming of new blood, new people into the team as they fold in, or as people come and go, you know, that's exactly what you want, like technology projects where you're constantly bringing in contractors, right? Like, you want people that can continue to like permeate from the inside that culture. And then those contractors come in, they adapt to that culture, they deliver, right? They deliver and perform. Then they go about their merry ways, but like they'll probably take that same culture mentality with them because it's impacted them in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that was a big part of how even Aries got started.
Okay.
You know, where the genesis of Aries was that there was a group of us who were full-time associates. There was a group of us who were different consulting firms. We were all working on the same project together. And then what we realized was that we really enjoyed working with each other. And we were able to deliver the project in a way that even the main vendor was kind of stunned at how fast we were able to get it in, given everything that was going on. And so that kind of became a series, you know, it's like a bar conversation, like, hey, we should form a company and just do this.
Yeah.
And then it was literally about like a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, that the core group that became Aries kind of got started. And then it was like, you know, and I joined, you know, around the first, you know, I ended up joining up. It was just like that kind of like, oh, wow, you know, it's like, you kind of hear the whispers.
So you want to hear something funny is from my vantage point, right? Like I'm kind of watching that happen on LinkedIn or from having conversation with a lot of the folks here in Aries. And, you know, I kept saying to myself, wow, because you kind of pull from two of my main clients that I sell my services to. And I was like, for the projects I've been on, these clients, they seem to yank all the people that are true drivers of things, whether it be getting the work done, collaboration, culture, right? Like these are people that like consistently get things done well in a very collaborative way. So the selection process seemed to be very cognizant of that. And, you know, like I said, pulling from two different entities I've been at, it was funny because I think at one point I acquired like, oh, you pulled so-and-so. And they were like, yeah, I've never met this person, but I just heard about the way they operate.
Yeah.
And I said, let me tell you from first-hand experience, they totally operate in this collaborative way of getting things done. They have the right attitude every day. They bring that right energy. And so like you guys have done a great job as far as building a culture through a core group, right?
Right. And I think it's interesting too, because like, you know, I was a little bit later in coming in, and it was also that piece of like, you know, just kind of understanding that, you know, just being able to work well as a group and being able to work in such a way that, you know, you kind of, you know, it makes things easier. The projects are hard, like there's no doubt. And you also have that kind of that classic group dynamics of, you know, you're kind of forming together, then you sparring and trying to figure things out. You have your normalization, and then you have your breaking apart. And in a lot of ways, that aligns to a sports season, you know. And so that's where a lot of the metaphors for me, especially with like what was happening with Babcock, was like, because that happened at the very beginning, like when they were going through the forming phase. Yeah, you know, I feel for Pierre. They're like, hey, congratulations, you're going to get to be a first-time NHL coach. On the heels of this. Yeah. You know, it's like, you now get to run this, but, you know, so good luck.
Yeah. I can relate to that a little bit being a, you know, contractor resource who often inherits programs that I wasn't the first call, but now I'm being called to clean up, right? So I can relate to that a little bit because Pierre is totally walking into a cleanup situation of how do we salvage the season when the person we brought in to be the head coach literally failed before the buck even dropped in the new season.
Right.
In record fashion, like, what, 3 months?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 months.
Going in, they were just starting camp.
Yeah.
When everything, and then the rookies were already at the rookie tournament. So, and then I think also too, it's like getting back to the question of like, you know, what does Jarmo do? You know, I think Jarmo's got me in a situation where, you know, he's going to have to be sure that he is, you know, reiterating what that vision and direction for the organization is, and being sure that him and Pierre are operating on the same level as far as being able to deliver that and get that down to the players. Because I think too often, what sometimes happens in organizations, and again, being a big baseball person, there's been a lot of things and a lot of tensions between on-field coaching staff, such as manager and down, with front offices. Because back in the day, it used to be the front office, it was kind of like your classic matrix management situation. Front office, their responsibility was to get the players and get the budget from the owner, and then that was then handed over to the coaching side. And the coaching side was responsible to develop the players that they were given and to manage the game and the competition. Now you start to see more of a fluidity where now, because of analytics, you have managers saying, we want this lineup. Because our computer model tells us that this lineup is going to be, it has been optimized for efficiency. Now, how many times have you heard that from a project management standpoint in a company? And so you had other managers push back. And they were like, no, I run the on-field, you run the off-field.
Right.
And those people found themselves fired.
Right. And you see that across all pro sports, right? Like, we're in the age of analytics, we're in the age of data. You know, there's sensors on jerseys tracking every movement. There's people in the stands tracking every movement into the database for analysis. Players are getting real-time feedback in between plays on, like, you know, what they could do to increment by an inch or a second, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, you know, many iterations later since the infamous Moneyball, right, in baseball, I feel like every sport has gotten there.
Right, and it was kind of fascinating because I was watching. There was a quick mini profile of Kim. I'm gonna mess up her last name. Kim Ng, who's the general manager for the Miami Marlins. First woman to be a full general manager in Major League Baseball. Her organizational pedigree is off the chart. He came from the New York Yankees back when they had their run in the 90s, and then was at the LA Dodgers as assistant GM. And one of the things that she really talked about was that she gave a lot of first-time managers. For her manager is a first-time manager.
Okay.
And so she really wanted to create that culture of opportunity. That, that we were going to, as an organization, we were going to give people opportunities. We weren't just going to go, it would be very easy for her to say, like, I need to go get, someone with like a lot of managerial experience, got a first-time GM,
Yeah.
And she was like, no, I'm going to get someone who, just like I got the first opportunity, I'm going to give them their first opportunity, and we'll work together. So.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about that from a motivational standpoint, right? Like, there's experience with people who have always held these positions, but then there's that hunger of being the first and that, like, extra motivation of, I don't want to, make it down the last as well, right? So if I'm the first to fill in the demographic, I'm going to make sure that someone else gets their opportunity as well.
Absolutely.
So I think that's another culture and team dynamic at play there.
Yeah, and I think too is like the other thing that's kind of fascinating a little bit is just like how different groups use technology, how different, how do you go about building that team, especially when you may not have, there's the team you get to pick, and then there's the team you're given, right? And it's like, how do you make those dynamics work? And I think that's a fascinating question. Like, if I'm looking at so if you're Pierre, and this is your first NHL coaching job, and they think Babcock over you,
yeah,
and you've been picked over twice. You've been good enough to be on staff,
right?
But how do you go to the ring?
I know, right? Like, it's the second look, and we all know that there's a different dynamic between players, the head coach, the assistant coach. Typically, the assistant coaches are more like encouragement behind the scenes and saying, like, hey, do this a little bit different, work harder here. This will get you back in the lineup, or get you more ice time, or whatever it might be. Versus head coach is all about results. They have to be a little bit more cutthroat and hard-nosed on decision-making to instantly turn that dime, right? Like, turn on a dime and now be playing a different role as Pierre. That's a tough dynamic, because you've already established yourself as an assistant on this team. Now suddenly you're putting on a totally different hat and a different role. It's going to be very hard for them to adjust on the fly and have success this year.
Yeah, and I think too is like one of my favorite shows to watch is every year NFL does Hard Knocks.
Okay.
And it's where they record training camp. And it was interesting this year with the Jets. The Jets requested that they not show when get cut. That had always been kind of like a hallmark of Hard Knocks was cut play, And it was really interesting though because like that dynamic with the assistants, where the assistants are coming in, they're really rooting for guys. But there's also a line that came from a couple of years ago, which was one of the assistant coaches pulled aside a guy who had been just writing super hard. And he could tell it was really bothering. He said, listen, man, he says, the reason I'm yelling at you like this is because I care about you. I want you to make the team. He goes, if I ever stop yelling at you, that's when you know you're in trouble, right? Because I stopped caring. And I'm only yelling at the guys. I'm only coaching hard the guys who I think I can get on the team and have them improve. But if I stop yelling at you, then you're done.
Yeah. Yeah. And to bring that full circle just to, professional journeys and whatnot. Like I just did a LinkedIn post the other day about like thanking the people that gave me time early in my career to help me figure things out, inspire me, motivate me. But one of the things I made a point to say was sometimes challenge me, right? Like, there are people that pushed very hard on me because they saw potential. And I'm really grateful in hindsight for that push. And it was painful at the time. Extremely painful.
Oh yeah, all growth comes with a level of discomfort, right? I did something kind of similarly when I was presenting at QA at the Highway. I did shoulders and giants for the people in QA who kind of helped me get going, And one of the names on that list, was someone who it was as a young QA analyst, it was really difficult to be on projects because a lot of times what would happen is I would be rolled onto the project when they were rolling this person off.
Okay.
And so in hindsight, it was, my leader at the time, her having confidence that I could pick up from where this really high performer was taking off. At times, it was like trying to follow Robin Williams at improv night. Robin just is so everyone's like trying to catch their breath, and then you walk up the stage and do your bit. It's not going to go well.
No. Yeah, you can't match that.
But I grew a lot from that experience because it was like, okay, so what do you need from me? Because obviously I'm not going to be the person I'm following, but what do you need? And that negotiation became, something that was really valuable further I got into my career.
Awesome. Well, I think this would be a good, tie out between two of our passions, right? Like project delivery, culture. I would even say driving towards results, right?
Yeah.
I love that we could bring these two forums together. It's the first time I've ever done this, but the more we talked about this subject, the more and more I was like, I think there's parallels between corporate and my sports world, particularly in the hockey passion. So this has been an awesome conversation. Hopefully the viewers have enjoyed it too. I know it's a little bit different for us, but I will be posting this and dual branding it as both of my my podcast forums, Project Manager in Real Life, as well as the Between the Two Birds forum, talk about the Babcock incident, but also organizational leadership and culture. So thanks, David, for being a guest.
Yeah,
it's always a pleasure, sir. And be sure to like and subscribe to the Facebook pages, the YouTube channels for both forums, the LinkedIn forum for PMIRL Live. Follow Scott Q Consulting, which produces all of these shows. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast as well to get updates on future episodes. You can find David Leslie on LinkedIn, as well as myself, Chuck Scott. I'm your host, and I look forward to speaking to you all next time. So thank you.